Welcome to Mindfulness, where true soul-stirring stories are told to help you live consciously and transform your life. In today's video, you'll witness the emotional journey of a woman abandoned by her husband after a tragic accident, only to have him kneel before her 5 years later asking for forgiveness. This isn't just a tale of betrayal, it's a powerful anthem of forgiveness, inner strength, and unconditional love. Because sometimes it's only when everything falls apart that we finally begin to live for real. Emily once believed she was the luckiest woman in the world. At 28, she had a steady job as an art teacher, a cozy little home in the suburbs, and most importantly, she had Mark. Mark, her charming, successful husband, was a rising architect in Chicago. He had a warm smile, attentive eyes, and always knew how to make Emily feel safe. Everyone admired them. They were the perfect couple, a living testament that true love exists. And Emily believed it with all her heart. She believed in love, in marriage, and in God as the three pillars holding her world together. Until one rainy afternoon in April. It was a Friday. Emily had stayed late at school after teaching an art class to her third graders. As a small treat, she decided to stop by her favorite used bookstore, a tiny indulgence at the end of a long week. On her way home, just a few blocks from her house, a black SUV struck her from the left. Everything went black. The screech of brakes, someone screaming, the smell of blood and rain mingling in the air. Then, silence. She awoke in a hospital bed. Days had passed, she didn't know how many. Her whole body ached, numb and foreign. A fractured pelvis, mild spinal damage, and a long, jagged scar that stretched from her left cheek to her temple, across the face Mark used to call "my gentle beauty." Through blurry eyes and morphine-induced haze, she scanned the room. And then, Mark walked in. He wore a crisp, expensive shirt, his coat still damp from the rain. But what Emily noticed wasn't the worry on his face. It was the fleeting flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a momentary discomfort he tried to hide. She wanted to believe she imagined it. But in the days that followed, her quiet unease turned into undeniable truth. Mark no longer held her like he used to. He avoided his gaze when the nurse changed her bandages. He spoke less, sighed more. The urgent work calls became more frequent, even when she begged him to stay, just a little longer, in the lonely hospital nights. One night she woke up from a nightmare. Panicked, she called out his name. It took her a moment to realize the room was empty. He hadn't stayed the night in 3 days. Then came the morning that changed everything. Mark walked in carrying a manila folder and a heavy sadness in his eyes. "Emily, we need to talk." She nodded, her heart clenched. He sat beside her, placing his hand over hers for the first time in weeks, but the touch felt cold, unfamiliar. "I've been thinking a lot. I think we both need something different now." Emily said nothing. She stared into his eyes, waiting for a reason, an explanation, a thread of hope. "You need someone who can take care of you for life, and I don't think I can be that person." She still didn't speak. "So, if the accident hadn't happened, would you still be leaving me?" Mark went silent. And that silence was the answer. He placed the divorce papers on the bedside table. A generous check slipped out from the folder. And then he walked away. He didn't hug her, didn't kiss her forehead like he used to. The hospital door closed, softly, but it thundered in his ears. Emily lay there motionless. The check fell onto her hand like the final insult. In that moment, she understood. In Mark's eyes, she was no longer his beloved wife. She had become a responsibility to be compensated. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Her tears mixed with the sound of it, and with that, a new chapter began in Emily's life. Lonely, shattered, and left behind.
The court finalized the divorce in just 30 minutes. Mark didn't show up. He authorized his lawyer to represent him. Emily signed the papers with trembling hands, not from physical pain, but from the hollow realization that she didn't know what she was signing. Was it a divorce decree or a death sentence for the rest of her life? She stepped out of the courtroom. Her crutches were still new, but her eyes had aged by years. The sun was shining outside, but inside Emily, it was still winter. She moved out of their shared house. Mark kept all the property. He wired her an extra compensation amount, which she never touched. Emily rented a small room at the end of a run-down hallway. A single bed, a scratched wooden desk, and an old easel covered in dust. That was all she had. No more Mark, just her and a silence so heavy it pressed on her chest like grief. After the accident, Emily had to undergo physical therapy every single day. Every step was a battle, not just against her broken body, but against the hopelessness that quietly gnawed at her soul. She once had a life full of love. Now she learned to bandage her own wounds, to stand up after collapsing in the shower, to fall asleep without anyone texting, "I miss you," at night. Worse than the physical pain was the pain of being left behind. Emily found her way to a small neighborhood chapel, an old wooden church tucked humbly between working-class apartment blocks. She sat in the last pew after therapy sessions. She didn't ask for anything in particular. She just sat, quietly, sometimes with her eyes closed, sometimes crying without sound. The elderly priest, Father Thomas, began to notice her. One day, he gently sat beside her and spoke only one sentence. "When everything is taken away, maybe that's when God begins building something new." Emily bowed her head. For the first time in weeks, she let the tears fall without trying to hide them. One afternoon, as soft sunlight filtered through the window of her rented room, Emily opened the old box she hadn't touched in years. Her paint palette, brushes, and blank canvases. She began to paint, not just as a passion, but as a means of survival. Faces slowly came to life. Not perfect, not polished. Twisted expressions, tearful eyes, but in every one, there was light. A faint, thread-thin light, but it never went out. She titled the series, "Souls That Still Breathe." One Sunday, after Mass, Father Thomas invited her to his reading room. He handed her a worn Bible and pointed to a verse in Romans. "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God." Emily broke down. She had once believed the accident was a punishment, that being abandoned was her consequence, that loneliness was proof of failure. But now, for the first time, she began to believe that loss, if lived with faith, could become a gift. Emily made a choice. She would no longer accept support from Mark. She stopped counting the days since she was left behind. Instead, She poured herself into her art. She opened a small art class at the church for disabled children and single mothers. There was no set tuition, just a wooden box labeled "Give as you're able." Every painting she completed became part of her healing journey. She was no longer the fragile Emily waiting to be rescued. She was now the Emily who used her own pain to lift others from theirs. When you have nothing left to lose, that's when you begin to give everything you've got. 5 years after being abandoned, Emily didn't just survive the darkness. She stepped out of it and began creating beauty for the world. At first, Emily painted simply to hold her mind together, but gradually, what emerged on her canvas wasn't sorrow, it was beauty. Absolute, mesmerizing, almost otherworldly. Every face she painted seemed to carry a soul. It wasn't just technique, it was emotional depth, a kind of inner light that made people stop and stare. She had no fine arts degree, no business card, no gallery agent. And yet her work began to spread online, not because of fame, but because of its truth. One day, a contemporary gallery in Chicago reached out and invited her to host her first solo exhibition. The title? Perfection Beyond the Broken. On opening night, Emily stepped onto the small stage. She wore a simple white dress, her hair pinned up neatly, the scar on her face still visible, a quiet declaration. I don't need to hide my past to be beautiful. The room was packed. Reporters, art critics, even professors from the city's top art schools. And yet, silence fell as they gazed at her paintings. One journalist asked, "Where do you find the inspiration to paint such perfect faces?" Emily smiled gently. "From imperfection. I once believed I was ruined, but it was pain that taught me to see true beauty, the kind that comes from endurance, faith, and forgiveness." From that moment on, Emily was no longer just an artist. She became a symbol of resurrected beauty, a living example of a woman once shattered who chose not to break. She was invited to talk shows, art schools, even became the face of an international mental health initiative. But through it all, Emily remained humble. She still returned to her little church every Sunday. She still taught free art classes for orphaned children. And in her tiny apartment, she kept one painting she never sold. A self-portrait from years ago, sitting on a hospital bed, holding the very first brush she touched after the accident. One autumn afternoon, as Emily's new exhibit opened at the Chicago Institute of Art, a man stepped into the gallery. He stopped in front of the largest painting in the room. A woman with her eyes lifted toward the light, arms open as if letting go, her face so gentle no one could look away. That man was Mark. He stood frozen. On the wall beside the canvas was the title, Forgiven. Mark couldn't believe his eyes. The woman he had once left behind was now radiant, not only in the painting but in real life. Not because of her beauty, but because she had become something he had never had the courage to become. Emily entered the room. Their eyes met. No words needed. Mark stepped forward, voice quiet and trembling. "I don't know what to say. I only know I didn't have the strength to walk with you, and you turned that into something so beautiful I can hardly bear to look." Then he knelt, in the middle of the gallery, before everyone, not to beg for a second chance, though his heart may have longed for it, but as a gesture of respect and deep, wordless remorse. Emily reached out gently and helped him up. Her voice was soft, like morning dew. "I'm no longer the woman waiting for someone to keep their promise. I'm the woman who's learned to live fully, even after being left in half." Mark nodded. He understood. And this time, when he walked away, he didn't flee. He accepted. And Emily? She turned back to her exhibit. But in her heart, there was no bitterness. Only one thing remained: absolute freedom.
There are scars that don't need to be hidden, because they are proof we've lived, endured, and overcome. Emily didn't return to the past. She stepped into her destiny. Her encounter with Mark had closed a circle. No one owed anything. No bitterness, no regrets. Just two people who once walked the same path until life led them in different directions, each with a lesson to learn. Emily didn't go back to Mark. She didn't need to, because she had found something that many spend their whole lives searching for: peace. Not peace because everything worked out, but peace because she had stood tall when everything fell apart and had not lost her heart. After the Forgiven exhibition, Emily received countless invitations from art institutes, churches, and trauma recovery centers. But she chose something different. She opened her own space called the Grace Studio. There, she expanded her art classes for disabled children, abandoned women, victims of abuse, for those who had lived too long in the dark and forgotten they were worthy of love. At Grace Studio, Emily didn't just teach painting. She taught people how to turn pain into beauty. One single mother once told her, "I came here because I was falling apart. Then I saw the painting you made. I saw the scar, the truth, and the light. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could begin again." When asked what helped her survive and succeed after everything she had been through, Emily simply smiled and replied, "I believe God never took his eyes off me. He was silent when I was hurting, but through the pain, he taught me what the light never could. And I believe when you still carry love in your heart, you've never truly lost everything." If you've ever been broken, if someone once walked away from you, if you look in the mirror and barely recognize who you used to be, remember this: you can still rewrite your story. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. Keep walking, not because someone understands you, but because you understand that your life is worth living fully. And believe, when you sow faith in tears, you will reap peace in light. Emily never became someone's wife again. She became the spiritual mother to hundreds of broken souls. She never asked for the love she lost. Instead, she gave something far greater: hope, light,
and kindness. Thank you for listening to today's story. If Emily's journey moved you, please like the video and share it with someone who might be waiting for a hand in the dark. We'll see you again in the next story, where loss is rewritten by love and dreams are reborn through faith. Before you go, what kind of stories would you love to hear next? Let us know in the comments. Your opinion will inspire our next story.